spend the first 7 to 10 minutes telling you what an extraordinary privilege it is to be in this world-class centre of academic excellence, and how humble I feel before such an important and well-educated and intelligent audience. But I'm a bit worried about time, so take it for granted, it's true. Now, my title, Individual versus Society, Objective, Subject, Reality or Trick, I'm continuing, Ferdinando gave us at the beginning the idea of meta-modernism and all these sort of contrasting dualities. And Eric took us into the space between these, the liminal space between these, and the weirdness that arises we come across. I'm going to continue that by looking quite closely at one or two of these dualities and looking closely at the space between them and seeing where we can find the footsteps of the trickster. And we're going to see how close we can get. But I hope I remember to say this again at the end. Just as the Tao that you can name is not the true Tao, so the trickster that you can actually catch is not the true trickster. But we'll do our best. Now, I'm going to start with, I want to know how many people, isn't this supposed to move? Oh, yes, that's it. How many people saw some or all of Helia? Good, quite a number, yeah. For those who didn't, Helia was a sort of television series which was a group of people in America going on what Andrew Collins and Graham Coates called a psychic quest. In other words, a sort of exploration, guided not so much by maps and academic knowledge, but more by intuition, divination, and local folklore. Now, when you do that, what seems inevitably happen is you find a lot of weirdness. Strange coincidences and things crop up. Now, it does it very much in the spirit of Joel Barocco described, that as though you're reading the script of life and you see a footnote marker on a word. So you look at the bottom of the page, but there isn't a footnote. So you go to the end of the chapter, there isn't an endnote. Go to the end of the book and there are no endnotes. So you're left with this weird feeling that something's significant here, but what the hell is it? Now, a lot of these things are like that. And a lot of that happened in Helia. Now, I watched this with a particular agenda. I'm very much out of it in South Africa, out of the sort of mainstream of, but when I left, the skeptical movement was very powerful. You know, Dawkins and that, and so they were very critical of the occult, magic, and those things. Now, I had sensed that there was a change. And so I watched Helia thinking, how would the public take this? Would they see, as Weird Studies described it, it's bringing back the fun into paranormal research, things like that? Or would they see it as the ultimate example of woo-woo madness? And so I watched it in the presence of my inner skeptic. And the sort of thing I noticed, and I may not get this exactly right, but there was an episode where the group, they weren't quite sure where to go next. And they were in this hut. And so, thank you very much. And so what they did is they put one of them in a trance, a very controlled trance. He was sort of, wired up. And they recorded everything that happened and made notes what he said. And in that trance, it was a bit like spiritual seance. He sort of, I could see a tin can was one of the things that came up. And then, not long after, their quest took them to a deserted mine tunnel. And it was a very spooky episode, sort of in the light with their torches and all that, and a great sense of something's coming up, something significant. Powerful television. And they found a tin can. And they found this significant. Now, my inner skeptic says, what? Is there any deserted mine shaft in the world that doesn't have a few tin cans and broken bottles in it, Now, in telling that story, I left out one word, a rather important word, the word very. They thought it was very significant. Now, my skeptic says, well, to think a tin can is significant, that's weird. To think it is very significant, that's downright ludicrous. Out of that comes my first question. Why is it we undervalue the subjective? If someone says they find something significant, who are we, other people, to say, no, it isn't, it's rubbish? Now, this is, to me, quite a big issue, because I'm going to jump to the big one. I can think of few subjective experiences more painful than unrequited love. Unrequited love has caused people to commit suicide, to commit murder. It has sent people into war. So you can't say it's a small thing. So I'd like you to imagine a young man in the agonies of unrequited love. Why a man? Well, you'll find out when the example extends a bit. The Queen of Heaven has turned his back on him and rejects him, and he feels like a squashed worm before her perfumed feet. Now, what can he do about this experience? Well, one way is to what I call the route of explanation. He might decide he's going to study psychology at university to try to cope with this experience. He might become a Jungian and look into projection of the anima. He might do, is it neurology, where you look at the chemicals in the brain and all that sort of thing that could cause these terrible feelings. Or he might be an evolutionist, what does this sort of passion contribute to the survival of the human species? Whatever. But the point is, if he goes along that route, society is going to give him acceptance, recognition, if he actually gets a degree in it or writes a book or something, and he might be on the path to fame and fortune. Now, not everyone is an explainer. Some people are expressors. They're more likely to make a novel, a film, an opera out of that experience, or even a pop song. But again, society would accept that, would give him recognition, and he could be on his way to fame and fortune. Now, I represent this with a picture. Oh God, I have to do this twice, 3 times. Yeah, this is my well-known sort of 4-way compass. And I always point out this is not categories, these are directions, orientations. And I've twisted it, so I put religion at the top, magic at the bottom, because I'm emphasizing particularly the extent to which religious practice beliefs that are taking you towards the collective. The word religare, to bind together. And so if someone does something which, say a tribe, they all dress up as deer and dance and behave like deer, you could say they're sort of confirming their tribal identity with their totem animal of the deer. But if one person goes off on their own to a secret place, and maybe does just the same sort of things, dress up as a deer and all that, we tend to think, well, that's more likely a magical operation. He's doing it for power or to get understanding of the deer or whatever. So that's the distinction I'm making there. Oh, it's vanished. Is it up there? Yeah, it is. Oh, God. I might fall over looking up to that. Now, what I've shown is that given a strong subjective experience, you can move in the direction of explaining or expressing, and you're moving towards a collective acceptance. But what about the person who instead decide to explore rather than explain or express? So I'm thinking of this young man. He's been reading Down Fortune. So he goes to a deserted beach at night when the moon is going to rise above the sea, and he lights the fire of Azrael, and he pours his heart out that night. He speaks to the moon. He invokes the goddess and says, is there any resolution to the way I feel? What can we do? What can I give you of what I feel? Now, does that person get acceptance, recognition, fame and fortune for that? I think not. In fact, a lot of the population would say what he's doing is weird. Now, I'm going to come back to that example, because it's an important one for me. But it raises a variation on that. Oh, God. A variation on that. I think I have to aim it this way. Is that right? Ah, yeah. Oh, God. This is terrible. Yes. Why do we undervalue the subjective? I relate it to the tension between the individual and the collective. Now, in Thundersqueak, which I wrote around about 1979, I suggested that the individual versus the collective was going to be an important challenge for the Aquarian age. And I explained that the reason for that is that I had been reading Liz Green, the psychological astrologer. And she, being a Jungian, is very much into the shadow, the role of the shadow. And she has this idea that when you've got the signs of the zodiac, the opposite sign tends to play a shadow role. Now, the example she gave was the age of Pisces. The opposite sign is Virgo. And she made it clear, of course, we think of Virgo as just someone who hasn't had sex. But it meant a woman who is independent, closer to the word virago. And it's true, for the last 2,000 years, roughly the Christian era, the independent solo woman has borne that projection in many cases. From the pressure in a family, that the daughter must marry in order to be a proper member of society, through to, witch burnings and torture and persecution of individual independent women. And so I asked myself in Thundersqueak, what's the equivalent for the age of Aquarius? Now, Aquarius is very sort of 11th house, it's democracy, the people, equality. Those are the sort of elements of Aquarius. And opposite is Leo, the king, the individual, king of his own, ruler of his own kingdom. And when I heard our new Prime Minister a few months ago giving an impassioned speech about the crisis in the world, that democracy was always under attack from a new wave of dictatorships, I thought, doesn't that sound like Aquarius versus Leo? But I'm actually interested in more the other end of the spectrum. The pressure society can put on the individual, the outsider. Whenever there's a sort of a mass shootout or a school killing or something, doesn't the press when it interviews people, want to hear, oh, he was always a bit of a loner? As though being a loner is the recipe for the you're going to go mad and do that sort of thing. There's this pressure. And there's the suspicion of the outsider, the fear of immigrants, the xenophobia we have a lot of in South Africa, that anyone from another country, suspicion, fear, projection onto them. Now, I'm going to point out the trickster element of this because it's actually the paradoxes here. Society also likes to take individuals and put them on a pedestal. Pops, heroes, celebrity culture and that. But also, there's nothing they like more than knocking them off their pedestal as well. So to me, there's a definite tension here between society and the individual. Now, it's got particular relevance possibly to us here because as people with an interest in the occult, we are liable to be seen as outsiders. And so it might have particular relevance to us. Now, I don't want to exaggerate that because I think at present the public is actually quite well inclined towards magic. But it is always thin ice. Now, in South Africa, we do have occult police on the lookout for occult crimes. And so much of the popular horror stories do include a dash of magic to tune up the horror. So I think there's thin ice. This is something which we should be careful about. I was given for Christmas a book called the Book of Joy, and it was conversations between the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Tutu of South Africa. And it's all about the joy of humanity, of our oneness, of caring for other people and all that. It's very New Agey. And like a lot of New Age stuff, it did the positives very well. But when it got to the negatives, you got all the old cliches you get from the media. Greed, envy, hatred. This is all because of it. We're also individuals. Now, this just didn't ring true to me. Oops. We've been presented with this picture of the glorious, loving humanity as united, the rhizomatic from mycelium of joining us all and all that, and how together we are unbeatable when we all come together. All these very positive things about being united. But there's this dark underbelly of individualism. Now, you see, people blame greed, envy on individualism, but you can't be envious unless there's someone else to envy. You know, greed, okay, an individual wants millions of pounds, but the only value that money has is what society gives it. So I think that these are really examples of the tension between the individual and society rather than being just blamed on individualism. You know, Man Friday, alone on his desert island, wouldn't necessarily be racked by these problems because there's no one to compare with, there's no one to challenge. So I think that this is a very false picture, and I will offer you what I think is a much truer picture. Oh, come on. Where am I going to aim this? Yeah?
Do you want me to do
Can I just tap it? I'm just going to tap it, I think.
Sure.
There we are. Yeah. When I did the Abramelin operation, I was really doing something which really is extreme individualism. I was cutting myself off from society and really going into myself. Now, if you read my account of the operation, it'll look as though actually I had a lot of interaction with people. But that was because in our society now, some people say, well, surely you should have put up a notice on the door, locked the door and said, keep out, dangerous magical operation in here, don't come in, leave me alone, and so on and so forth. But of course, if I did that, I would have the journalists and the police over my wall very quickly. So what I had to do, inevitably, the odd friend who hadn't seen me for years passes by and drops in. I had to be very discreet. I'd say, oh, how lovely to see you, that's fantastic. Unfortunately, you haven't come at a very good time. I'm in this sort of meditation retreat thing, and, okay, but have a drink, but sorry, I can't join you in the drink. I've made vows and things like that, But do come back at a better time. It'd be really lovely, when I'm not going to have to go and meditate. So you're doing all that because you're just trying to adapt to modern conditions. But what was I doing internally? That's rather interesting. I could think, oh my God, I've blown it. I've broken the conditions. Instead, I thought, I'm being tested. I've made this vow of what I'm going to do, and the demons, if you like, or the guardian angel, are challenging me, trying to get me to slip and get out. And so I had to sort of keep my sense of sealed that I'm in it. I'm just doing the polite actions to sort of, as it were, keep the gate shut and to get people to go. It was an interesting inner state. Now, all that, you see, would be considered very weird by the group mind people, by public. And what's more, I did a work I did on myself, which I described in Thundersqueak, which I think I called it stripping off labels, which is actually a misnomer, because what I was doing was detaching from labels. And it goes like this. The labels that society puts on me, Lionel Snell, a 77-year-old English man who's interested in the occult, okay? Well, 77-year-old. Well, last year I was 76. Is that me? No. You know, it's just a label. I happen to be 77. Next year I'll be 78. English. Yeah, some people say I'm very English. But I have been living in South Africa now for 20 years, and I'm eligible to get a South African passport if I wanted, become a citizen of South Africa. Would I then stop being me? No, I'd just be Lionel Snell holding a South African passport. So that's just a label. Man. Well, I identify quite a bit with being a man, but I could have a sex change operation. To what extent would I stop being me? Would all the books I've written, all the experience I've had no longer be mine? No, it would still be mine. A lot of me remained through that. It's another label I'm given, and so on. Now, what I was doing, you see, would seem very weird to the public, because some people so identify with those labels that they think it is absolutely what they are. You know, for some men, being a man is so important that anything questions that or challenges that is really scary, is alarming. For some people, some English people, being English is so important that the idea that they might be Europeans, that is frightening. They would vote against that. It's scary. The other thing is, a more general thing, is if I'm stripping away these labels, what's left? Will it be left with emptiness? What I actually found is that as I detached from these labels, I must say that, I was actually in a way becoming bigger. Because what I was finding was my common humanity. And that's very remarkable. I can't say that I completed this progress, but I was working towards that. The extraordinary thing is that me in Hertfordshire, a suburb, I was actually discovering the same thing that someone on the other side of the world, you know, a meditator in Nepal, would find the same thing if he stripped off all his labels. So this, you see, is the more accurate picture for me, because there I am plunged into the extreme individualism, and what I'm actually closing in on is my humanity. And that's a truer picture. And the same thing applies above here. You see, each label we're given is an invitation to a party. I'm British. Woo, there must be 20 million of us. Rule Britannia, great. I'm British and I went to Cambridge. Oh, that's pretty good, yeah. I think there's about 300,000 Cambridge alumni. And I bet more than half of them are British. Well, you know, that's something to be proud of. I'm British, I went to Cambridge University, I'm interested in the occult. Ooh. No, there must be, not hundreds of thousands, but there must be thousands of them, because I've met a lot of them, and I've had wonderful conversations and done wonderful working with them. So, that's good. I'm British, been to Cambridge University, I'm interested in the occult, and I live in Cape Town. Oh. Statistically, there must be one or more out there. I've never met them, I don't know how I'd meet them. You see, for all these wonderful invitations to parties, it's possible to be very lonely in the crowd, as I've discovered. So that is why this is, you know, a more accurate picture for me. But itself, it is still deceptive, because what about this clear line between the two? Above that line, there's really, it isn't quite like that. Really, it's a sort of tapioca pudding of individuals, okay? And below the line, it's a tapioca pudding of complete human beings, just in shells. So there's something about that line is very deceptive. It's the sort of thing we're looking at, the boundary between the two. There's a trick happening there. And this trick is actually very typical. But to take some other tensions, I mean, in America, has been torn apart by the idea of the right versus the left, you know, Trump versus woke. And yet, when you look at that in the same sort of close way, there's a hell of a trick in that. Look at individuals. So, for instance, I mean, just to take a corny example, because it's often quoted, who is the absolute icon of extreme right wing? It's Adolf Hitler. But he was a vegetarian. I mean, you know, how woke? You see, it's nonsense when you actually look at the details. So there's a big trick being played here, these false boundaries. And this is something I want to look closer at. Can I get the next one? Objective equals real, and the idea of the consensus. I'm going to go back to that young man who is considered weird. Now, a particular breed of skeptic would go further than that. They would say to him, look, here's a telescope. Feel it, it's solid, it's real. Look at the lenses in it. Aim it at the moon, there's the moon, and you can see there the moon, 250,000 miles away. It's made of a rock and dust. Women are all around you. They're biological entities. There's absolutely no connection between the moon and women. So to talk to the moon to solve your women problems is not just but weird, it is ludicrous. Now, I would question that, because everything the guy knows about the moon, its reality out there, is actually modeled inside his head. All experience of womanhood from you're coming out of your mother's womb right through is also modeled inside your head. That man is inviting a false subjective experience. It goes like this. You see that telescope, and it looks as though it's made of brass and heavy. You pick it up, it's brass and heavy. You aim it at the moon, and you can see the moon out there. And the false subjective experience you're getting is that it's like your consciousness is flowing out and touching that telescope, putting it at the moon and sort of flowing out to the moon and feeling it's a hard lump of rock. Well, actually, all that happens is that electric signals are being fed into the brain. When you look at that telescope, signals come into your brain from the optic nerve into your brain. You reach out to touch it, and what you're getting is signals along your nerves into the brain. All the brain is getting is input of tiny neural signals, and yet it's creating this sense of reality. Now, that skeptic would admit to that. Yeah, you're right, but what the subjective feeling you're getting actually reflects what is out there. It's real. But I would question that, because a conjurer like Darren Brown could hypnotize someone, put them in a very suggestive state, and instead of saying, here's a telescope, they would say, here's a giant dildo. And the guy wouldn't then look through it and that sort of thing. He would experience that he's holding a dildo. Because the brain works with predictive coding. It's a necessary thing to react fast enough in dangerous circumstances. So like high-definition television being broadcast, it actually predicts what's expecting to find, and then just uses the sensors to correct it, to keep it up to date. So I would say, if all experience of women and experience all you know about the moon is all modeled inside this small piece of fatty tissue in your skull, the idea that they could be totally air-gapped and separate is totally ludicrous. If it's all being modeled all in there, I agree it may still be weird to talk to the moon about your women troubles, but it is not ludicrous, because they cannot just be separated in that way. It's all coming from the same machine. Now, that raises the question, how does the brain do this? How does it manage this? Now, if I could answer that question, I wouldn't be here. I'd be touring the world as a Nobel Prize winner, But I'm just going to put you something rather suggestive. Are you aware that every time you switch on a computer, you are reenacting the creation of the universe? You see, the silicon chip with no current in it is unmanifest. Do you mean it's nothing? Yeah, nothing. Oh, you mean zero? No, zero hasn't come yet. That's coming. When the power flows, the silicon becomes distinguished between that which is charged and that which is not charged. And out of that distinction, symbolically, comes 0 and 1. Thus, the Tao, which cannot be named, has separated into yin and yang. And from that will come the 10,000 things. Or I slightly prefer the Kabbalistic version. But out of the unmanifest, Atziluth, we have the world of emanation, the charging of those silicon things. And from the world of emanation comes a Briar, the world of creation. And we now have a 1. Now, once you've got the 0 and the 1, you have ASCII characters, and out tumbles all of the 10 digits that we use. And the 22 paths that link them are the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. All language and number and symbols tumble out once you have got to that stage. So we get down to the world of Yetzirah, the world of formation we're in now, with all the numbers and symbols, things like that. And then the fall to the 10th Sephiroth is the fall to material reality. And we're going to be given a reality, something real. This is the reality you're given. It's the desktop. Now, it's a reality, it really is. I always try to avoid giving definitions. People ask me for them. I'm afraid I'm going to succumb to giving a definition. A reality is a space where magic is forbidden. Okay? Well, let's consider, the trickster with his cups and balls, okay? He shows you the cups, they're solid, there's a ball. He puts the ball under the cup, moves it across the table, lifts it, it's still there, shake, 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 you can hear it. And then suddenly, it's under another cup, and it's gone from that cup. Wow. He moves it again, he puts the cup under, and it turns into an orange. Whoa. Now you try and do that on a desktop. You got your homework, and there's a file here called homework. So you slide it down, it goes into that file. It's vanished. Open it up, it's there. But is it the same essay as you put in there? Yeah, you open up the essay, it's the same as the one that's up there, you can put it back there. Okay, that's brilliant. If magic was allowed on this thing, it would be utterly useless. You put a file away. It's still up there. No, it isn't even up there, is it? See, is it?
It's upset with you for saying it.
I'm sorry. I'm praising it. It's doing good. 45 seconds. Oh my God. Well, I'll just continue out. You see, there were several different files I had up there. Is there any connection between them? No, absolutely no connection. That was my homework. That's some maths I did that week. That's something I downloaded from the internet. That's my school timetable, says the kid, you see. No connection between them at all. Just as there's no connection between the moon and women, or between a tin can in my mind and one I found in a tunnel. Absolutely separate. But actually, they're all Word documents. So maybe something's happening in the background. Now, you see, you could say this is a reality tunnel we're given. And it's customizable. You can change the background, you can change the font, you can change the colors, you can move things around and everything. It's a customizable reality tunnel that should be given here. And you might say, well, it's a bit boring. I wish there was a bit of magic in it. No. If you file something away and you can't find the next day, it's gone somewhere else, that would not be very useful. If you write the most wonderful woke essay for your director of studies, and when they print it out, it's a fascist rant, that would be, you're doomed, you see. So this is absolutely important that no magic is allowed on this thing. And that is its strength, that is its value. I wrote an article which I think came in What I Did, Blast Your Way to Megabucks, where this was a response to a time when people wanted to be able to bend metal like Uri Geller. They'd spend time concentrating on spoons and things. Wow, I want to get it to bend. But I pointed out, that's pretty horrific. Imagine you're in an aeroplane, it gets a bit bumpy, and you see the wings flexing, and you think, no, I mustn't think about that wing. I mustn't think, no. And then you think, what if someone else is not as strong-willed as me and they can't stop themselves thinking about it? There's 100 people in this aeroplane. It's scary, scary, scary. You see, when a mountain climber would trust his life to a little bit of steel or carabiner, when the physicists tell you that steel is actually empty space with a scattering of particles through it, my conclusion of this thing is, why is there so little magic in the world? It's because we are such good magicians. We do this incredible job of holding that muck together till we give our lives to it. And so I'm saying that this reality, it may be a bit boring, that sort of thing, but actually it is doing something very valuable for our survival. Yes. And what is covered up, I think, when you say actually these are all Word documents, things like that, the sort of the reality behind it, you could say it's an example of this continual space of meanings that we heard about, which I think appears here. Yeah, that's it, all that sort of crap, that's going on in the background and everything like that, unseen, and it's the world of Yetzirah, of formation, is happening in the background. But anyway, please go on to the next one. I want to show you this picture because it's going to trick us into telling lies. Now, this is quite a well-known picture, so could I just see who's seen this picture before or recognize it? Yeah, good number, yeah, that's it. Well, it's going to make us tell lies. Someone says to you, Lionel Snell showed you a picture, what was it? You say, oh, it's that well-known picture of Martin Escher holding a mirror ball. Okay, that's a good description. No, you just told a lie. Martin Escher isn't in that picture. He's out here. All you see is his hand. All there is of Martin Escher there is a distorted image of him. Now, okay, it's a lie, but is it a damned lie? No, it isn't, because you see, a good portrait photographer could probably get enough information for that picture, sort of straighten it out a bit, to draw a good likeness of him. Even weirder, an architect could take a sheet of paper and a ruler and a pencil, and could probably give you a very accurate layout of that room, despite it being so distorted. And in fact, I mean, you can't do it in this picture, but if it's a real mirror ball, Martin Escher could take a magnifying glass and he could read the titles on those books. All the information about that room is in that ball. Amazing. You hold it in your hand. That is nothing. Take it out on a starry night and every star is reflected in it. A single photon coming from outer space and hitting that ball would leave its mark inside that ball. It's incredible. All of the universe in a ball you can hold in your hand, folded in. Now, so every single point in that sphere matches a single unique point out in space. I've been tricked into telling another lie, because there's one point which that isn't true. The center of the sphere maps onto infinity in all directions, all around us. This is the marriage of Nuit and Hadit. I am the naked brilliance of the voluptuous night sky. Hadit, I'm not extended. In the sphere, I'm everywhere the center. As she knew it, the circumference is nowhere found. In this sphere, these two come together. So, let's go back to that picture. Oops, that's it, yeah. Now, we're not going to get tricked again, are we? We know to say this isn't a picture of Escher. This is a picture of a mirror ball in which we see a distorted image of Escher. Okay, we got it? Lies. We've been trapped again. You see, it isn't a picture of a mirror ball. You can't see the mirror ball. All you can do is surmise its existence from that distorted image you see. The surface of the ball doesn't exist. Is it inside or is it outside? It's neither. It's a liminal place. It's infinitely thin. The surface, it doesn't exist. There's nothing there. And yet it gives us this extraordinary illusion. Now, Nietzsche said, and he put it in rather good philosophical context. I think it's in The Dawn of Day, or one of these aphorisms. When we gaze at objects in a mirror, the only thing we cannot see is the mirror. But when we reach to touch them, the only thing we can feel is the mirror. And this is the trick that is playing here. We're getting close to the trick, I think. It's this liminal surfaces. He's between states. We're getting close. What we call reality is a trick, but is a trick that is vital for our survival. There's a tendency among skeptical people to say that this discovery of the world as solid objects is actually the highest brain function we have here. In the past, primitive people were in participation mystique, you know, they were one with nature and they would sort of talk to the trees and all that sort of nonsense there. But now we know the truth. It's all hard objects out there. But actually, I don't think that's such a high mental function. My cat believes in the material world, you know, dog, cat, tree, object, agent, boom, jumps into the tree for safety. He lives in a physical world. Every butterfly, you know, lands on a flower, expects to find a hard, solid flower with honey in it, you know, nectar in it. So this is actually the most fundamental thing, and I'm in danger of giving another definition. I'd say a brain is an object or process that gives us solid reality. And these other things we've been doing, like getting up into the software, going back up the tree of life, I would say are higher brain functions. This is a way of evolution. We're presented with the trickster giving us what is real, what is safe, what we can live with. And it is a trick. And the same trickster is tearing us apart with these ideas of this versus that and all these contrasts. You know, right wing, left wing, and all these things. It's tearing us apart. Now, I wrote a book, The Good, the Bad, the Funny, where I suggest, what I was exploring was, if instead of God, devil, the Manichaean universe, God, devil, us, them, good, bad, if we had like some of the Central African religions, we had God, devil, trickster, well, how would we think differently? God, devil, trickster. When people say, oh, a third element, they sometimes say, oh, yes, I quite agree, there's a central middle thing. No. If you have two opposites and you have a middle thing, you've just emphasized that one dimension. The trickster is a separate, individual, equal character. And the argument I was making for that is that when we think in twos, like, you know, right, left, all that, or when we think in even-numbered terms, we're set up for conflict. You see, Earth, air, north, south, east, west. Okay, that's a good analysis, it's a useful thing. But you get the north-south divide, you get east-west conflict. Even the hexagram, you know, symbol of perfection, has got an upward triangle and a downward triangle. Whereas in odd-numbered thinking, you get a flow. I compared the 4 female archetypes, mother, daughter, Amazon, witch. and they become stereotypes. Oh, she's an Amazon, mother figure or whatever. Compare that with maiden, mother, crone. Those are not stereotypes. They are part of a flowing process of growing. It's a waxing and waning of the moon, and it is like or cardinal fixed mutable. You get a flow there. And I argued in this book that if we thought in trinities, things would flow more, rather than separating into these oppositions. When I was, in the 50s, when I was young, the Liberal Party was still a sort of a dynamic party. There were actually two Liberal newspapers, Manchester Guardian, the main broadsheet, and then there was the News Chronicle, and that soon fizzled out. If you take Winston Churchill, he was a surprisingly socialist if you look back to his past. He actually suggested that this was when he was a minister, when he was in the government, he suggested that less money should go to equipping the Navy so that the money could go to the workers, the poor workers, to improve their lot. For many years, he was a Liberal Party member. He was actually a Liberal MP. And yet, he became the epitome of conservatism. You see, with three parties, you can shift your perspective, you can change, you can evolve. But you try and do that in America, where there's the Democrats and Republicans. The Republicans who turn their back on Trump have been slaughtered. I mean, if you do that in a two-party system, you are a traitor or you've done a U-turn, both political suicide. So I was arguing the value of this flowing, threefold way of thinking. And I've mentioned Thundersqueak a few times, so I'm going to explain that Thundersqueak really is a dialogue between two of the planets in my horoscope. But I decided to give it respectability by putting a quote at the front, even if it's a fake quote. Oh no, back one. Yep. From the Ballad of Thundersqueak. So I'm just going to look at the last two verses here. I begin by punning with reality. The word real, as in real estate or Real Madrid, is royal. So I say reality is royalty. Let us bow before the one. We recognize how important it is. But let him not forget 'twas we who placed him on the throne. As creators of reality, we too can taste divinity. But the aftertaste that haunts you is the demon Thundersqueak. Oh, Thundersqueak, my blundersqueak. What about the blundersqueak? Well, if you knew all the things that tried to trip me up on the way to coming here and doing this talk, you would know what that means. You wouldn't have to ask. Thundersqueak, my blundersqueak, my give in but don't go under squeak. One of the themes of the book is the extent to which acceptance and surrender can be a tactic rather than a defeat. By give in but don't go under squeak, while heavy hands reach to catch you and close on emptiness, the open palms are joyous, you never cease your dance, Thundersqueak. There we are. So we've got very close to the trickster, but it's the trickster we can catch is not the real trickster. Thank you.
That was really cool. Thank you very much. When you mentioned Liz Truss, and is it working? We mentioned the Prime Minister and freedom and democracy, and it called to mind something which happened, which was in an interview she gave, where she said the words freedom and democracy, and the interviewer passed out in front of her. And I wonder if we should be paying more attention to omens like that, like presidents being attacked by bald eagles. And I remember when the Pope abdicated. The Basilica of St. Peter got struck by lightning. There's quite a lot of that thing going on, and I wonder if that, when you were talking before about the other side of the shadow side of the archetype, I wonder if we should be looking harder at omens. And I find it quite interesting that these things get reported, but we don't seem to see the irony in the omens. So it's more of a comment than a question.
I didn't quite catch the essence of the question.
It wasn't really a question. It was a comment on. It was a comment on how that trickster manifests through omens, and the example I gave was freedom and democracy causing. Well, as she said it, the Sky interviewer literally collapsed as she said it.
Yeah. The weirdness of these things come up, and you're not quite sure why they're so different. It's very much different, and yet you feel they're so different. It seems to be pointing at something, and one never quite really what it's pointing at until afterwards, and a long time after. That was it. That's clear. I realize that one thing I did forget to say is that this trickster, you see, the reason that the card comes so close to the beginning of the sequence of the trumps is rather than, if you're on a spiritual path, why not the Hierophant? Why not the priestess? The trickster is the one that turns people back. They start getting interested in the occult, and then they find some trick or some charlatan or something, and they say, "Oh no, I won't have anything to do with that." That's what turns them back. You see, or another thing was that that the person playing the cups and balls, he puts the cup on it, he moves it, it's vanished. The ball's vanished. Now, for a second, you feel the joy of having experienced magic. But it's less than a second, it's a fraction of a second before you say, "Oh, that's a good trick," and you've got rid of the magic, you've banished it. The consciousness has done its work. If I suddenly turned into a chicken in front of you, there was a chicken, big chicken instead of me, I could guarantee with about 95% certainty that whatever state of consciousness you've been in a second before, you would now all be wide awake, staring hard, blinking even, or even pinching yourself. Is this real? And there, because it's big magic, I think I would give it 1 second, 2 seconds, before you think, this is a trickster conference, and we've got Fernando here. Oh yeah, nice bit of magic, and then a ripple of applause would sort of pass through. 2 seconds to banish magic, you see? The consciousness does a marvelous job. And in Thundersqueak, I called this alert consciousness that stares hard the great abortionist. There's a great abortionist eliminating the magic as we go. And and defending us, okay. So that's something I didn't emphasize. And why the trickster is at the beginning of that path, because seeing it and saying, "Oh, it's a trick," means that we don't go any further. Rather than, people say, "Oh, Crowley is a thoroughly disreputable character, I wouldn't learn anything from him." I think he's thoroughly disreputable, but I learned a hell of a lot from him. I went through that doorway that this trickster opened, rather than saying, "It's a trick, I'm going back."
Lionel, do you mind if I just use my kind of privilege to speak to something? The computer desktop, and the extent that we don't open the folder and find an orange in there. But some of us are still not willing to rule out that we could find the orange, right? Because here, throughout this conference, one of the interesting things about technology, kind of like reality, that's not working, is it? It was before. Like reality is precisely this, is that we're expecting it follows these linear programs, it's this system, it's methodical, just as the materialists and rationalists say. So it must always be so, therefore the anomalies aren't there, or they're errors, right? That's the ghost in the machine.
If anything goes wrong, you need virus protection.
But of course, any of us that use technology, like we've seen all the way through this conference, the reality of the situation is you stand yourself there, who works with technology, going, "Well, no, all of the things are in place. It's just not doing the thing that it's supposed to."
That's my blunder suite, I tried so hard to get it all working before I started.
But it strikes me that this is true of reality as well. That often everything is in place and the expectation is there, and yet every now and then it just will not do the thing that it is supposed to, and that's the thing that draws our attention and often is the signifier.
I remember when AI people and that were saying, why consciousness? The world would work perfectly well if we weren't conscious and things just happened. But when I wrote Words Made Flesh, I argued that in a virtual reality, you have to have some debugging mechanism. And then we've just seen it. It's this getting rid of magic. The virtual reality made by your head, it must be debugged. You can't have it going wild and weird things happening, unless you've taken a trip. But that's going back up into the software. This is it's debugging software. It's necessary, and it plays an important role. And as far as my consciousness has got a real reason for being there, as well, I say.
Absolutely.
Thank you for sharing all of your wonderful ideas. I wanted to come back to Hellier.
Oh, yeah.
You said you began watching it as an inner skeptic with that eye. Did that change at all as you continued?
Yes.
What are your thoughts about this whole trickster element in the role in the show?
Well, I really agreed with what I watched it because I heard about it on Weird Studies, and I could see it's bringing back the fun. Parapsychology and that was coming to the point of 1,000 boring tests to see if there was a slight statistical change. And this was bringing it to life, and because this is what happens in psychic quests, it would encourage other people to go on psychic quests, just for the curiosity, the surprises that it throws up. So I thought that was great, yeah.
Thank you very much.
All right, amazing talk, Lionel. Thank you so much. The question that I wanted to ask, so you mentioned early on the anecdote of the young man out on the beach trying to solve the problem of unrequited love through magic. You said you would come back to that story because it was very important to you personally. Can you talk about why that is? Like what the significance of that story
Oh, I've felt that personally. I know that feeling. But it was important to me for this talk because it was going to lead to the skeptic saying, this is real, this is it, and this is not real. And so that really was importance in the talk of that, yeah. But by the way, when I was talking about threefold things, I thought of your triune game. Oh. And when I looked at it, I felt this is flowing, this game, so yeah,
awesome.
As an example.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much for that beautiful talk. If I could just make a comment, my favorite bit was when you'd set up this scenario in which the desktop of the computer represents reality and or a reality, which is where magic is not allowed, and have already set up the character of the trickster as the one you can't catch, no matter how tricky the trickster gets. You then, in a beautiful piece of what is obviously magic, illustrated this by magically making the desktop stop working, right? And both proving the point that if magic comes into reality, it doesn't work anymore, it's useless, but also showing the trickster uncharacteristically literalist just to prove that he's not what you said he was. It was really impressive.
I mean, quite, that'll take some beating, so that comment might be the crescendo. Okay. Unless there's any, but I think that's where we should leave. Okay, we thank Lionel one more time.